Order. Before I call Sarah Coombs to move the motion, I ought to explain this is my first time chairing a debate in Westminster Hall. So I expect you to be very gentle with me. And given I'm in the chair, if you're not, you know, I'm in the chair, aren't I? So, so Sarah Coombs to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered the prevention of knife crime in the West Midlands, and it's a pleasure to serve under your first chairmanship, Sir John. I want to open this debate by talking about a knock on a mother's door, the kind of knock that too many parents have experienced, and too many more dread. Last week, a woman from my area told me her story. She had already heard through friends that something had happened that night. Her sister was out searching the local hospitals. She had rung the police and they told her someone would be there soon. Then she heard a knock on the front door. What happened to my son was what I was always worried about. He was the kind of person who always protected his friends, and that's what happened. He stepped in front of his friend to protect him, and he was stabbed. The loss of a child in this way feels too enormous to comprehend. But she explained to me the ways it had affected not just her own life, but her other children's lives. My daughter is so angry, but she won't talk about what happened. She feels there is no justice for her brother. She's only in primary school, but she's self-harming. We are here today in this debate because we have got to stop this happening. Families shattered, communities destroyed by knives. It's my duty as the MP for West Bromwich to do everything I can to work with the police, with schools, with constituents and my community to stop this nightmare from happening in the first place. In the West Midlands, we have the highest rate of knife crime per capita of any region in England. But I don't want to talk about stats today. I want to talk about stories of the victims, of those who live in fear, and even those of people who have committed these terrible crimes. This debate is focused on prevention, so I want to talk about the role policing has to play in that, as well as intervention by schools, communities, and families to keep young people safe. Last year, I went to a football tournament in memory of one of the young players who was stabbed to death. I spoke to some of the teenagers there, and I was truly shocked by what I heard. They were angry. They distrusted the police, but still felt that there should be more of them around. They felt trapped in places where crime was all around them. They felt they had no opportunities for a different and better life. One teenage boy said to me, and I will never forget this, that he didn't think he would live to the age of 22. This past week, I got in touch with their coach again, and I asked them for the young people's thoughts on what the government needs to do to tackle knife crime. And here is some of what they said. The gang violence and knife crime is getting worse in my area. We need more youth centres and funding to help stop this. Could we do more to stop youths from buying knives on the internet? Why aren't there more police patrolling the town centres that are known for knife crime and gangs? Our local area is getting worse and no one seems to care enough to do anything about it. Education around knife crime should happen at a much younger age. A majority of young people don't take it seriously because it has not happened to someone close to them. So maybe education needs to be by someone who has really suffered as a consequence of knife crime. The mother I mentioned earlier felt similarly. There is no support, no prevention, not enough youth clubs. It's too easy to access these weapons. You can go and buy them online with no proof of ID. There's nothing for young people to do now. My youth club provided experiences like whitewater rafting. Now the youth clubs are all gone, social media has come in, and crime is through the roof. After years of cuts to policing and youth services, it's no surprise that we haven't been able to turn the tide on knife crime. Our new Labour government has shown important ambition in committing to halving knife crime in a decade, and I'd appreciate the Minister in her response going into some detail about how we are planning to achieve this. The young people I mentioned identified some themes that get to the heart of this matter. Visible policing as a deterrent, reducing access to knives, and early intervention and education. And can I ask the Minister how young people are being involved in policy design to ensure the action government takes is effective? The police service in the West Midlands was slashed in the austerity years. We still have 800 fewer police officers and 500 fewer PCSOs than we did in 2010. The knock-on effect of this is obvious. It's not just seeing police walking around our town centres and crime hotspots that keeps us safe. It's about police and PCSOs having the time and the space to build those key community relationships, gain trust and vital intelligence that can stop crime. One of our most important pledges during the election was to restore neighbourhood policing, and I look forward to us having 13,000 extra officers and PCSOs across the country. As well as wanting to see police on our streets, people often raise with me the need for strong sentences to deter people from carrying a knife. And fundamentally, we've got to reduce access to these lethal weapons. When looking at rates of knife crime per capita, West Brom is the highest for possession in Sandwell. We had a dreadful incident before Christmas where young people were running around West Bromwich in broad daylight wearing balaclavas and wielding machetes. It was terrifying for the people who were there, and it has a huge knock-on effect on local businesses and the entire area. West Midlands Police have set up the Life or Knife initiative, which provides education in schools and allows people to anonymously report when someone is carrying a knife. Our Police and Crime Commissioner has also funded weapons surrender bins across the region. But we've got to cut this off at source. My local paper, The Express and Star, ran an award-winning campaign with Wolverhampton mother Pooja Kanda to ban these zombie-style knives and machetes. I applaud the paper for this important work, and I fully support the Labour government's commitment to do this. And as the victim's mother I talked about earlier said to me, online retailers have to be held to account. So can I ask the Minister, now that the ban has been in place for a few months, is it proving successful? And in particular, what enforcement action is being taken against these online retailers who are delivering these zombie-style knives straight to people's homes? And these things are all important. Police presence, reducing access to lethal weapons. But perhaps the most important thing of all is education, early intervention, and constant support for young people who could get caught up in violence. Research shows that young people excluded from education are at greater risk of getting involved in violence, which is why it's so important we do everything we can to keep young people in school. In the last few years, there have also been important programmes with organisations like St Giles Trust, which have supported young people at teachable moments, such as when they are in custody or in A&E. But in too many cases, the intervention comes too late, as in the next case I want to talk about. Now, this might be slightly unusual, but I'm going to read the words of someone on the other side. These are the words of a constituent of mine who went to prison for 14 years for his involvement in the murder of a man using a knife. And his words are powerful, and I think they're important, because as we've heard, young people respond to others' lived experience. So when I asked him how he feels now about being involved in a knife attack that took someone's life all those years ago, this is what he said. I feel so many emotions. I feel ashamed, I feel embarrassed, remorseful, unequivocally. It doesn't matter that it wasn't my plan and I didn't wield the knife. Ultimately, decisions I made that night led to that, and if I hadn't made certain decisions, he would still be here. I feel dirty for that. I don't dream often, but when I do, they are bad dreams, violent, people trying to kill me. Whenever I see knife crime stories about mothers losing their sons, it takes me back. And it's the ripple effects, the people whose houses back onto the park where it happened, the first responders, the guy who was walking his dog who found the body. All these lives are changed forever. Having spent so much of his life so far in prison, he now wants to work with young people to stop them following the same path of violence. I asked him what would make the difference for young people now to stop them committing such a terrible crime. And this is what he said. It's more than what to say, it's what I do. The authenticity and the realness and empathy is so important. You need somebody like me who has the life experience, so you can talk openly about their home life, parents, friends, family, hobbies, hopes and dreams, and build trust and rapport, and show love. Take them on positive trips, take them to places they'd never be able to afford to go, and show them the life they could have. And it has to be a 24/7 thing, support all the time. The night of my offence, when I would have reached out, it would have been late, and you need someone to be there then. Not office hours and then they turn off their phone. At any hour, you need someone to say, "Where are you? I'm coming to you, stay where you are." There is so much more of my conversation with him that I think it would be useful for members to hear, but there isn't, unfortunately, time. But I hope in her remarks the Minister can address the importance of wraparound and consistent support for young people and the need to give intervention and mentoring from a very young age, not just at the point when a child is suspended or already in trouble. His key message about what will prevent knife crime is education from an early age, in the right way, delivered by the right people. So to conclude, Sir John, knife crime doesn't just destroy families, it destroys communities. It destroys town centres when people are afraid. My honourable friend and constituency neighbour, the member for Tipton and Wednesbury, couldn't be here today, but she asked me to reflect on the impact it has on schools too, such as Wodensborough, where a pupil who was killed will forever be remembered. I am proud that this government is so committed to stopping the nightmare of knife crime in our communities, and I see it as my role as the local MP to do everything I can to be part of that.
I remind members, if they want to attract my attention, they need to bob. I can see they know that already. The question is that this House has considered the prevention of knife crime in the West Midlands. I can Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Sir John. And it's a pleasure to serve under your first chairmanship here in Westminster Hall today. And I am grateful to the Honourable Member for West Bromwich for securing this important debate today and for providing many of us from across the West Midlands with the opportunity to contribute. The tragic and devastating effects of knife crime have been a central concern for communities across the West Midlands and the Walsall Borough, particularly for those of us representing constituencies which have been impacted by such violent acts. Knife crime is a problem that cannot be ignored. It requires the attention and action of all of us in this House and beyond. In December 2023, I secured a debate on knife crime in the West Midlands and highlighted the shockingly high rates of violent incidents in our communities. Sadly, as we now enter 2025, the statistics remain deeply troubling. In the last 12 months alone, leading to March 2024, West Midlands Police recorded 7,000 knife-related offences. Sadly, a 70% increase from 2016. But these are not just numbers, Sir John. These are families, their friends, loved ones, and entire communities that are affected. So we must, as a nation, reflect on the devastating toll these crimes take on real lives. Because behind each statistic lies a story of personal loss and grief, of families torn apart, of communities shaken to the core. In my own constituency of Aldridge Brownhills, we are reminded of the heart-wrenching consequences of knife crime through the loss of James Brindley, who tragically lost his life in 2017. James was just 26 years old when he was fatally stabbed by a 17-year-old as he walked home from a night out. But James's death sparked an outpouring of grief in the community and led his parents, Mark and Beverly, to found the James Brindley Foundation, a charity committed to reducing youth violence and promoting positive change in our community. The Foundation's work, particularly their Life for Knife campaign and their commitment to providing knife amnesty bins across Walsall Borough, plays a vital role in providing young people with the tools and the support they need to make better choices. The installation of these bins, coupled with education and mentoring, which is also crucial, and partnerships with local businesses, as an inspiring example of grassroots action to tackle knife crime prevention. And one initiative I want to highlight today is Project Ray of Hope. This project, born from the success of the Knife Angels visit to Walsall in 2023, and for those of us who went to see the Knife Angel, it is one of the most poignant examples of sculpture that I have ever imagined, and just to stand there and see it, it is incredibly powerful. But the project that the James Brindley Foundation are working on aims to create a permanent public art installation in the heart of Walsall. It will serve as a poignant reminder of the damage caused by serious youth violence. And importantly, the project aims to engage young people throughout its development, providing them with an opportunity to shape the future of their community through creative expression. This collaboration between the James Brindley Foundation and Walsall Council exemplifies the positive role local organisations can play in raising awareness and providing solutions. I'm aware of the Government's announcement of the Coalition to Tackle Knife Crime, and I would urge Ministers to include the James Brindley Foundation in this critical initiative if they haven't done so already. The Government should be working closely with this type of organisation whose expertise and community engagement are essential to exploring effective solutions to this pressing issue. But as we all acknowledge the important contributions of organisations such as the James Brindley Foundation, we must also turn our attention to the broader question of how we as a society are responding to knife crime. The Government has a critical role to play, but so too do our local leaders and public services. The Labour Police and Crime Commissioner and the Mayor have significant responsibilities to ensure that our communities are safe. Yet I fear in many cases we are not yet seeing the level of leadership required to tackle this scourge effectively. Policing and public safety must remain a top priority. The West Midlands has one of the highest rates of knife crime in the country, with 175 knife-related offences per 100,000 residents recorded in the region last year. Yet at a time when we need effective leadership, the response from our Police and Crime Commissioner and the Mayor, I believe, is not good enough. I have long campaigned for a greater share of police resources in my constituency, including maintaining the police station in Aldridge, which is crucial for ensuring that our community feels safe and has the support it needs to tackle crime at the local level. And yet it still remains under threat of being sold off by the Police and Crime Commissioner. The police must also be empowered to act swiftly. The proposed devolution of powers over policing to the Mayor could, if handled correctly, provide a more direct and focused response to this ongoing issue. And I very much hope that the Police and Crime Commissioner will not waste valuable taxpayers' resources by taking legal action to resist the proposed changes. It's time for strong leadership. It's time for a change in approach, one that acknowledges the scale of the problem and responds with the urgency it deserves. This includes ensuring that local authorities, our police, our third sector organisations work together more effectively to prevent knife crime and protect vulnerable young people from falling into the trap of gang violence and criminal exploitation. One area where we can make a tangible difference, I believe, is in education, and I've long added my voice to calls for the integration of knife crime prevention into the national school curriculum, an initiative that could serve as a powerful tool to raise awareness and shape the next generation's understanding of the devastating consequences of carrying a knife. We need to teach our children about the risks, but we must also equip them with the support they need to resist peer pressure and make better choices. This is why I continue to back the campaign for knife crime prevention to be made a compulsory part of school education. I know it's a move that has already garnered significant support. Further to that, the Government should widen the scope, I believe, of knife bans. Far more knives are banned now than was the case in 2010, which is good. It's an issue that all parties should be concerned about, though. I know the Government continued the policy banning zombie knives in September, which is great. However, more can and should be done, which is why the previous Government sought to increase the maximum penalty from 6 months to 2 years for the offences of private possession, importation, manufacture, sale or supply of prohibited offensive weapons, and for selling knives to those under 18. I am aware that under the current government, the Home Secretary commissioned a rapid review to understand how these weapons are sold online and delivered to under 18s, to identify gaps in legislation and to find the most effective ways to stop this. And I do commend that effort. But now we need to ensure that it leads to swift action that strengthens our laws and holds those responsible to account. Rapid reviews need to lead to rapid actions. So, Sir John, as I conclude, I reiterate the importance of collaboration across all levels of society. We must work together to reduce knife crime and ensure that our communities and our young people have the support that they need to build a future free from violence.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I call the next speaker, looking round at the chamber, I can see a lot of people want to contribute to this very important subject. So I'm going to suggest that you restrict yourselves to about 5 minutes. We'll then get everyone in, give plenty of time for the spokesman to speak and for the move of the motion to say a few words at the end. So, let me call the next speaker, Preet Kaur-Gill.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Sir John. Let me start by paying thanks to my friend, the Honourable Member for West Bromwich, for securing this timely and important debate, highlighting the real-life impacts of knife crime in her constituency. Knife crime is a public health crisis. And as an ex-Cabinet Member for Public Health and ex-Children's Services Manager, it is essential that we tackle both the causes and effects of knife crime. In July, the ONS found knife crime in England and Wales had risen by 78% over the past 10 years. And this is a staggering increase and sets out the scale of the challenge facing the new government to reverse that terrifying trend within a decade. The West Midlands Police Force area, I am sad to say, is responsible for 10% of knife-enabled crime in the whole of England and Wales, and only the Met Police have more cases. The statistics never alone tell the real story. And in recent years, I have been witness to some horrific cases as the MP for Birmingham Edgbaston. Jordan Moazami was 18 years old and described as a role model by his peers, who was stabbed and killed on Tennell Road in my constituency in 2019. Mohammed Hassam Ali, 17 years old, who was followed and killed by a 15-year-old after a 4-minute conversation in Birmingham city centre. And D. John Reed, my constituent, 14 years old, who was hounded by a gang of 5 boys and grown men before being stabbed in the chest in 2021 and died. I can't do justice in words to the horror of these cases, and in every one what strikes you immediately is the senselessness of it. And in many ways, I think that is where we need to start, when we think about how to find meaningful solutions to the epidemic of young boys taking each other's lives. Prevention has to be our watchword here. And the root causes to understanding knife crime is complicated. It's often a picture of poverty, of drugs, gangs, exploitation, school exclusion, domestic violence, adverse childhood experiences, and being in care. One of the 2 boys, aged 12 years old, who killed Sean Sisahai in Wolverhampton in 2023, had experienced significant trauma in their life and been at risk of child criminal exploitation. And according to the defence, he had been groomed, exploited and trafficked by men in the community. So that there is a complicated story to tell there. And one of the questions you ask yourself is, who is looking out for these boys? I think child criminal exploitation is often misunderstood by professionals, which prevents the early identification of child victims. Too often, child victims of exploitation are criminalised rather than safeguarded, something which exploiters and organised criminal gangs anticipate and utilise to their advantage. The services that might identify them as at risk, schools, youth services, mental health services, are all under strain. Youth mental health services are in crisis, school exclusions have been at record level high, and youth services have been cut to the bone. And the tragedy is that sometimes it is that absence of a safe space that is putting children at risk. And some of the stories you hear are absolutely bleak. A Barnardo's practitioner at a child exploitation service shared evidence that during winter, groups of children often gathered outside a leisure centre, sat by the air vents, as that was the only place that they could feel warm and safe. And it became a spot for exploitation and described as a hot spot for adults or older teens, with cars driving by and offering lifts and McDonald's. And of course, that is how the dynamics of exploitation start. The favours, the debts, the escalating patterns of criminality. I was struck recently by a comment by Martin Griffiths, a consultant trauma surgeon in London and the National Clinical Director for Violence Reduction in NHS England, an incredible practitioner who has done some amazing work through his charity. He said county lines, drug carriers are all being exploited, whether it's knowingly or not, by individuals or organisations who utilise them because they are impressionable. They are mentoring these kids to do bad things. These are children who are low on support, self-esteem and resources. And it's precisely these lack of spaces and opportunities that is part of what puts children and young people at risk. Research by a YMCA in 2021 found that in England, local authority spending on youth services totaled £379 million, a £1.1 billion cut in youth services from 2010. And in Birmingham, I'm hugely relieved that despite the current challenges at the council, all youth centres are now going to remain open and be retained by the council or partner organisations. It's a huge testament to the importance residents and young people place on these services in our city, and I want to thank everyone who made their voice heard in the recent consultation. Communities and families have solutions and they need to be part of the plan for change. I'm really excited about the 10-year Young Futures programme the Home Office is working on, as it has the potential to do great things in my city. The creation of a new network of youth hubs is exactly what we need, and I would be grateful if the Minister could meet with me to discuss the provision in Birmingham. Across England and Wales, there were 50,000 knife-related crimes in the year to March 2023, and around 5,000 of those in the West Midlands Police Force area. I'm heartened by the Home Secretary's categorical commitment that every youngster found carrying a knife will trigger a rapid intervention, including a prevention plan, to stop them reoffending. Identifying those young people before it is too late is half the battle, and when the signs are there, we must act on them. I wonder if the Minister could say more about the plans laid out in our manifesto this summer to place youth workers and mentors in A&E units, pupil referral units, and I want to pay tribute to brilliant charities like Red Thread in my patch, who have been working at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital for several years. I mentioned Martin Griffiths as surgeon and clinical director. Well, the work he's pioneered at his A&E as a trauma surgeon is extraordinary. So often, many young people would turn up to his operating table, and he had seen them many times before. He realised that A&E admissions were a critical opportunity to intervene. And he has a multidisciplinary team at his hospital and based in A&E. And instead of just patching up children and sending them on their way, the team actually helped them to get education, work, or somewhere to live. There is mental health treatment, advice on special educational needs, and the police provide protection and support for those who want to get out of a gang. And the hospital allows the patients to stay there until it is safe for them to be discharged. And the results have been incredible. Readmission rates have dropped from 30% to 4%. Red Thread have a similar model and have demonstrated similarly remarkable results. 90% of the young people supported by Red Thread did not return to hospital for a violence-related injury in the following year. And 6 months after the intervention, 100% of the young people supported said they felt as safe or safer than they had before the incident. And young people who engaged in the full programme were 51% less likely to reattend than those who didn't. And a cost-benefit analysis showed that for every £1 spent, there was £4.90 economic and social benefit. I wonder if the Minister could say more about the multidisciplinary and multi-agency working to address violence or exploitation. Finally, we need to crack down on the criminals and routes into serious violence and crime themselves. Personally, it baffles me that we still do not have a specific statutory definition of child criminal exploitation. There's been multiple definitions resulting in a confused and fragmented response by authorities, and investigators have to use laws on modern slavery to punish those coercing or forcing children to move drugs. A new offence of criminal exploitation of children would allow us to go after the gangs who are luring young people into violence and crime. And I look forward to working with the government on its plan to introduce this new law in due course. So, John, I'm proud of the swift action the government has taken to tackle knife crime so far, banning zombie-style blades and machetes that were used to kill Ronan Kunda in Wolverhampton, setting an ambitious mission to halve knife crime in a decade, and launching a new coalition to tackle knife-enabled crime, working together with technology companies, sports organisations and the health service. But there is undoubtedly a lot more to do. So I'd be keen to hear from the Minister on when she hopes to bring forward the crime and policing bill so we can move ahead with the Young Futures programme and strengthen those laws. The message we need to send to young people is one of hope and opportunity, that our society cares about them and we are invested in them and their futures. Tackling knife crime has always been about prevention and protection as much as prosecution. And after 14 years of abject failure by the last government on this issue, I am looking forward to working with the Labour government to deliver change that saves more lives. Thank you.
Manuela Pasigala.
I also want to thank the honourable member for securing this important debate. Thank you. Knife crime continues to be a devastating issue across the UK, and the West Midlands is no exception. The number of recorded offences, over 3,600 last year, a 6% increase in the previous year, underscores the urgent need for more robust preventative measures. As honourable members have observed, a return to proper community policing will go towards making our communities safer. The tragic murder of my constituent, Cody Fisher, a young and promising footballer and PE teacher in a Birmingham nightclub in December 2022, highlights the devastating impact of these issues on families, friends, and the wider community. Cody was fatally stabbed with a smuggled zombie knife, exposing serious failings in venue security. Cody's mother, Tracy, has shown incredible courage in campaigning for Cody's Law. This law would mandate bleed control kits and metal detectors in late-night venues, practical, cost-effective measures that will save lives. Tackling knife crime requires more than reactive measures. we must address its root causes by prioritising investment in youth services, which were cut to the bone, education in schools, and community-led programs that offer young people opportunities and alternatives. And we also need to tackle the online advertisement and sale of knives to our young people. Cody's law is an essential step forward reducing knife crime in licensed venues and must be part of a broader strategy to protect young lives and create safer communities. I urge the government minister to adopt these proposals and ensure that no more families endure the senseless loss that Cody's family has suffered.
I will prioritise members from the West Midlands, and I hope honourable members from other places will understand that because of the character of the debate. So I think that's reasonable and fair. Can I, Alex Ballinger, please?
Thank you, Sir John, and it's a pleasure to serve under your Premier Chairmanship. And also thank you to my friend and the member for West Bromwich for calling this important debate and for a really passionate speech. I think it's fantastic to hear both from the victims and from the perpetrators of these crimes. As the MP for Halesowen, I am all too aware of the scourge of knife crime across our region. Many people from my constituency still remember the tragic death of Ryan Passy, a promising young footballer from Quarry Bank, who was stabbed to death in a nightclub in 2017. Ryan was killed as his assailants were able to carry a knife into that venue without being stopped and with no fear of being caught. And it's shocking that no one yet has been found guilty of his murder. His family is still fighting for justice more than 7 years after he was killed. And since Ryan's tragic death, knife crime has continued to blight our community. In August last year, 3 youths attacked and slashed a man on Silverton Lane in Cradley Heath. And in September, students at Lesos High School were placed under lockdown for their safety after masked youths were seen with machetes hanging outside around the school. The number of young men and boys carrying and using knives with impunity across our communities is deeply worrying. And residents are scared, with many telling me they no longer feel safe leaving their homes alone. This is unacceptable. People deserve to feel safe in their communities, and students should not be having their learning disrupted due to threats of violence. The numbers on knife crime in our region are terrifying. Research by the Office for National Statistics has reported that the West Midlands has the highest rate of knife crime of any region in the whole country, with more than 5,000 offences reported last year. Rates of knife crime in our region have increased year on year since 2015, and we now have higher rates of knife crime than in London. And worryingly, this seems to be driven by a big increase in children and young people carrying knives. Last year, over 3,200 young people aged 10 to 17 were charged with knife offences, which is up 20% on a decade ago. As MPs for the West Midlands, we should be deeply concerned about these statistics. The truth is, it's a legacy of poor decisions over the last decade by the Conservative government. A legacy of cuts to neighbourhood policing, cuts to youth services, rising child poverty, and failing youth justice system that works in the interests of no one. This government has a moral responsibility to act now to tackle this crisis, and our response requires a multifaceted approach. First, we must focus on preventing weapons from reaching our streets. This means making it harder for young people to gain access to dangerous weapons like machetes, ninja swords, and zombie blades. And in this regard, I welcome the government's new ban on these weapons. Second, the police must have the resources and powers to stop and seize weapons from young people on our streets. I was shocked to learn that the rate for police stop and search in the West Midlands is less than half of what it is in London. As we put more bobbies on the beat, the police in the West Midlands should be using our stop and search powers more frequently to respond to rising knife crime. And finally, and most importantly, we need to address the root causes of offending, offering young people hope, opportunities, and positive alternatives to destructive pathways. The government's creation of a new Young Futures programme, which includes prevention partnerships across England, is an important step to intervene early and stop young people from being drawn into crime. It is also important to act in our A&E departments when young people come into emergency rooms with violent injuries. This is a time when social workers and youth workers should be stepping in and offering pathways away from violent behaviour. There is no room for letting people fall through the cracks. I have seen the impact knife crime has on our communities. The families of victims, like Ryan Passy, deserve real action to prevent these tragedies happening again and again. but I'm confident that together we can work to prevent more knives getting on our streets, deter people from carrying them, and make people across the West Midlands finally feel safe.
Thank you, Sir John. It's an honour and privilege to be speaking under your chairmanship. And I also thank the Honourable Member for West Bromwich in securing this very important debate. I hope I can be somewhat succinct. I echo the sentiments by other Honourable Members in this debate. But I want to talk about my personal experiences as someone who grew up within an area that has had historically the most highest deprivation, high crime, gang culture, the area of Aston. And I grew up here in an environment where young lads would hang around on street corners, the local park, in local shopping centres. And we know the phrase, idle hands make a devil's workshop. But what was it that allowed me, my siblings, and people that were very closely affiliated with me, my social surroundings, to achieve so much coming out of an area such as Aston? And I reflect on my personal experiences. And I can say one of the most important factors that allowed me to remain out of gang culture, to not stand on corners or in the local park or in local shopping centres, were the youth centres. I had two prominent youth centres, walking distance from my home. It's now called the Sarthy House, and there was a play centre within the Aston Park. And we had youth workers, and I chuckle when I talk about the youth centres that helped steer my life. Fat Phil was his name, Sandra, and others. They were instrumental because they took us away from standing on corners, took us away from the local shopping centres and parks. They would take us out on weekend trips. And I, came from a family which wasn't wealthy. My father would work 12-hour shifts, and I would hardly ever see him. My mum was very keen to ensure that we stayed on the straight and narrow path. But it was the youth centres which had taken up all of my evenings and weekends. And it was all of these social activities that they would take us on that meant we were out of the gang culture, which we know was very rife. And so whilst my honourable friend from Edgbaston quite rightly points out that Birmingham Council, originally deciding to slash youth centres, has now decided to keep all youth centres open, what isn't being provided is the resources, because the staffing levels are being reduced. And I would urge the Minister to review what we have in Birmingham, because whilst the debate is around West Midlands, over the last 3 years, looking at the statistics, I think there were 6,185 knife-related incidents just in Birmingham. And so if we are serious about tackling knife crime, of course there's prevention, and youth centres, as I say, are instrumental in that. We need to resource these youth centres appropriately. There's no point having a youth centre where children can't go on events or play football at a local football stadium because they can't afford £7 per child. The parents just simply don't have that money. So that is very important, resourcing these youth centres adequately so that they can do the sort of things that I had experienced. We've had colleagues talk about, honourable members talk about social media, and I'm glad that this government is taking strident steps to address that aspect. But weapons being purchased online are critical. It's not just weapons being purchased online and closing that gap by making sure that people like Amazon and eBay and other online retailers are held to account. But also, there needs to be tougher rules and sentences for those adults that purchase online and provide weapons to young children. I think that is quite important, given the description of gang culture and the way young children can be coerced into that environment. But also police officers, PCSOs. We had, in inner city areas, community support officers setting up equipment and football and rugby and cricket. They would be in charge, and they would take young children to local parks and interact with them. And we've had, and it's been repeated already, that the significant reduction in police officers, but also police support community officers. And so I hope that the additional officers will assist, but they can't assist if they are not resourced adequately to do the sort of things that can drive young people away from gang culture. But in closing, can I once again thank the Honourable Member for West Bromwich in bringing this debate, and I sincerely hope that the Minister can take away my personal experiences and the need for additional resources in Birmingham, especially when we know that Birmingham has an enormous deficit of over £376 million. They simply haven't got the resources to deal with this issue and require additional funding from this government. Thank you, Chair.
Now, I want to get the members for Worcester and Strangford in. I've got 2 more West Midlanders. I'm relying on my West Midlanders to make time to make sure that our member from Strangford and Worcester get in. So I'm going to call Rhonda Druss next.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I also want to thank my honourable friend, member for West Bromwich, for bringing this debate to us this afternoon. Sir John, the West Midlands, back in 2022 to 2023, reported 180 incidents per 100,000 people, giving the West Midlands the unenviable title of knife crime capital of the United Kingdom. Knife crime is the leading cause of homicides in England and Wales, and around 11,300 knife crimes have occurred in the West Midlands between November 2020 and October 2023, and Wolverhampton, where my constituency lies, accounts for 7.6% of these crimes. I'm pleased about the action that this government is taking to tackle knife crime. I'm pleased to see that this Labour government has launched the coalition to tackle knife crime, working with the actor Idris Elba and the Elba Hope Foundation to reduce knife crime, and I would like to see how this coalition will work to bring together campaign groups, families of people who have tragically lost their lives to knife crime, young people who have been impacted, community leaders, together with technology companies, sport organisations and partners in the health service, education and the police, working with experts to try and understand and have extensive appreciation of what causes young people to be dragged into violence and knife crime. And hopefully this will provide the evidence to drive government policy. I'm also pleased that the government is committed to strengthening the laws around the online sale of knives, and I am pleased to see the creation of the Young Futures programme with the new local prevention partnerships, and particularly the creation of a new network of youth hubs. But, Sir John, we need to do more in the West Midlands, and we need to do more with West Midlands Police and with community initiatives. We need an increase in neighbourhood teams to carry out specific patrols where there are hotspots for knife crime at the specific times of greatest risk. And we need to continue the knife amnesty programmes, encouraging people to give up their offensive weapons in exchange for avoiding prosecution for possession. In Wolverhampton, 185 weapons were safely deposited, 97 of which were handed close to Tabernacle Baptist Church in Whitmoreens, in my constituency of Wolverhampton West. So, John, the community initiative to reduce violence is going to be run in the cities of Coventry and Wolverhampton, and that has been funded by the Home Office through the Youth Endowment Fund, and that is part of a global initiative seeking intervention of young people involved in violence and connecting them to an exit pathway from gangs and violence. And hopefully this is something that will be focused throughout the West Midlands. I also want to thank the Honourable Member for Birmingham Perry Bar for raising the issue of youth clubs, because I think this is a very important aspect in prevention. And we must realise the importance of youth clubs and youth services to prevent knife crime. We need those trusted role models in youth workers, and we need our youth to have activities in a safe, welcoming place where they can exercise their passion and drive and have access to support mechanisms through proactive strategies. In my constituency of Wolverhampton West, we have the Way Youth Zone, who have made a positive impact on knife crime prevention by providing engaging activities and programmes, building positive relationships, taking safeguarding approaches, bridging the empathy gap by bridging the gap between young people and law enforcement, and having partnership projects with other organisations. So, John, we need to have more of this.
Thank you. Serena Brackenridge.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Sir John, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and may I extend my deep felt thanks to my honourable friend for West Bromwich for bringing this important debate. But before I continue, I want to express my deepest condolences to the victims of knife crime, their families and everyone who has been affected by this devastating crime. My constituents in Wolverhampton North East, as well as myself, often ask, why have we come to this, where we have children murdering children? We've got young people who feel that they cannot carry on with their everyday lives without carrying some kind of weapon. We've got easy online access to such awful, graphic, extreme violence. In the West Midlands, the knife crime capital of the UK, as you've just heard from my honourable friend from Wolverhampton West, this is tragically the reality that we face. In my former role as Deputy Head Teacher, I saw how schools are in the eye of the storm. And I'll never forget the devastating impact on our community when 2 young men were murdered near a school where I worked. Incredibly sad, Ronan Kanda and Sean Cisahay. Innocent lives taken due to senseless violence. Sean, only 19 years old, he was walking through a park with his friend. He saw 2 12-year-olds sitting on a bench and they murdered him. Senseless. We had Ronan Kanda, mistaken for someone else, at the age of 16 years old, just a few steps away from the safety of his home, cruelly murdered. I've seen the courage of Ronan's mother and sister, Pooja and Nikita, as they fight for change so that no family endures what they're enduring day in, day out. Their strength humbles me, and I stand with them and every family affected by these senseless tragedies. Staff in schools have a motto, that it can happen here. We are always on high alert, as we knew that knife crime can happen anywhere. But don't be fooled by stereotypes. It's not just street corners with gang culture. This problem has not been dealt with, and therefore it has diffused into wider society. All communities are at risk, affected to some degree by the dangers of soaring knife crime. We must act, not just with stronger enforcement, but by addressing the causes of knife crime. And I welcome the new government's commitment to prevention, education and engagement alongside robust enforcement. So when it comes to prevention and education, we all know that education is often the first line of defence, and I personally saw the power of programmes that brought mentors with lived experiences into schools to show students the real consequences of knife crime. And we will invest in early intervention, helping those at risk through targeted support for families, schools and communities. Secondly, engagement. We know knife crime often stems from a feeling of utter hopelessness, being stuck in a rut of lack of opportunity and therefore vulnerable to the grip of negative influences. I welcome investment in programmes such as the Young Futures programme, a version of Stuart Start for teenagers, investing in youth centres, youth workers, bringing local services together to offer young people safe spaces and better opportunities. but of course enforcement. Police must have the resources they need to crack down on knife crime. Curfews, enforcement of penalties, drug and alcohol interventions, mental health treatment and stronger action against the criminal gangs that are drawing young people into this crime. This government has acted to close loopholes to get ninja swords, machetes and zombie knives off our streets, but I continue to call on this government to work at pace. Mr Chair, victims of knife crime and their families deserve our unwavering commitment to prevention and change to create a society where no young person feels the need to carry a knife.
Wind-ups will begin at 3:30. I call Jim Shannon.
Well, can I wish you well in the role you have as Chair of Westminster Hall, and I also thank the Honourable Lady for West Bromwich for leading today's debate and for setting the scene so very well. Prevention of knife crime in the West Midlands, of course, is no different from prevention of knife crime in Northern Ireland, or in London, or in Wales, or in Scotland. So the issue is prevalent and pertinent to everyone who's in this hall here today. It's always good to address the issues that are pertinent across the whole of this great nation, and we're very much aware of the increase in knife crime violence. So I've listened very closely to what honourable members have said and their thoughts have put forward how to address those issues. I look forward very much to the Minister and a response, because she always gives us encouragement by her response to the questions that we ask, and I'll ask a question at the very end in relation to this. So I thank the Honourable Lady for sharing experiences felt in her constituency and to address the horrors of knife crime. Knife crime remains a significant concern in the United Kingdom. In the year ending March 2023, there were approximately 50,500 offences involving a sharp instrument, making a 4.7% increase in the previous year. The Metropolitan Police recorded around some 15,000 offences in 23-24, the highest since 2019. When you think that's a 4-year high, then you grasp just how important this issue is and why it's so important that we speak on it today. The figures are shocking, Sir John. And it seems like every week, indeed, unfortunately, it seems like nearly every day, that we're hearing or reading online or in the paper yet another instance of a knife crime attack. There are many that still stick in my head, and to this day, I always think of the murder of Lee Rigsby. You remember that, Sir John? The soldier outside his camp, Ben Kinsella. Also, and even more recently, Sir John, the very horrific Southport stabbings. The statement was in the House just about an hour ago, when 3 lovely wee girls were at a dance class were killed and others were severely injured. The horror of knife crime cannot be underlined enough. Whilst it's said that Northern Ireland does not have the same scope of the problem as other areas across the United Kingdom, the stats for them are still shocking and it must be addressed properly. Last year, from the 12 months leading up to July 22, there was an increase of 8.4% in violence than there was in the year before. And there's also data to show that a percentage of sexual offences in Northern Ireland using knives or sharp instruments, and this is also recorded at a disturbing rate as well. In 23-24, the Belfast City Police District recorded the highest number of crimes in Northern Ireland, some 33,000, showing a high prevalence of these crimes in urban areas. I mentioned one, and I'm going to come to the end of my comments. In Northern Ireland, we have unfortunately attacks on women and girls of a level that's the highest anywhere else in the United Kingdom. One of these women that was murdered was Natalie McNally. She was brutally stabbed the week before Christmas of 2022. Natalie was 15 weeks pregnant as well, and the Northern Ireland Police Board has expressed concerns about the prevalence of knife-related crimes. The impact on communities is significant. I think about the families often, Sir John. I know that you and I would share that compassion, as others do in this chamber, on the loss of a loved one due to such a violent and horrific crime. And it is a grief that one can never get away from. So we must be doing more to address these. So my question to the Minister is this. Minister, if we're going to address the issue here centrally at Westminster, which is the responsibility of the Honourable Lady, can I ask, when it comes to pushing together legislation or giving advice to some of the regional administrations. I think of the Northern Ireland Assembly, I think of the Policing and Justice Minister in particular, Naomi Long. I think of the Policing Board, how we can do it better and exchange and share those experiences. I have every hope that we can do more to make our towns, villages and constituencies safer. And as always, we must give thanks to the police and the emergency services who did their bit to save lives and keep people safe in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And that knife crime will indeed become a thing of the past. There is indeed, Sir John, very, very much to do yet. Thank you.
Tom Collins.
Thank you, Sir John, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I recently met with Worcestershire's Youth Cabinet, young people representing our county, and they shared with us their priorities, and their absolute highest priority, to my shock, was crime and safety. They are very concerned by this issue, and knife crime is absolutely top of their list under that area. And they had suggested actions. We discussed all of the things that my honourable friend, the member for West Bromwich, raised about visible policing, prioritising the restriction of access to knives and early intervention and education, including the restoral of youth centres and youth services. But their key ask was that we go and do the work to understand the root causes and the motivations behind knife crime amongst young people. My takeaways from that conversation were, first of all, how keen young people were to collaborate on this issue as we start to tackle it. And second of all, how important it is that we don't work from assumptions, but we go and really understand from the perspective of young people what's driving this problem, that we listen, that we involve young people, and that we empower them. And that's all the more important when we realise just how fuelled this issue is by fear, by apathy, and by disenfranchisement. Young people care deeply about this issue. They are ready to engage, and they deserve a voice. And on behalf of the young people in Worcestershire, I want to echo their call and their offer. Let's act urgently at all levels of policing, disrupting and preventing knife crime. But as we do so, let's put young people at the very heart of that response. We will tackle this most effectively when we put our influence and our power and our resources in their hands. And so let us put young people at the very centre of what we do as we tackle and we end this problem of knife crime.
Very good. Before I call the Liberal Democrat spokesman, can I thank colleagues for their brevity and cooperation to make sure that all colleagues contributed. I want to leave some time for the mover of the motion to speak at the end. I now call the Liberal Democrat spokesman, Luke Taylor.
Thank you very much, Sir John. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship for yours and my first time. I'd like to also thank the Honourable Member for West Bromwich for securing this important debate and for her very passionate speech. It has been deeply moving to hear from members across the House about the horrific experiences their constituents have had to endure. It is tragic that we've heard so many names read out today who have been the victims of knife crime. As all of this House knows, the tragedy caused by the knife crime epidemic is unfortunately not confined to the West Midlands. And whilst I represent a constituency in a different metropolitan area, I think it's key to highlight today that these issues blight cities and towns across the country. Indeed, there is something uniquely challenging and disturbing about the vicious cycle of collapsing communities, poverty and gang violence in our cities. And that should unite us across this House in a newfound resolve to tackle the issue head-on. As a Liberal Democrat spokesperson for London, I'm acutely aware of the scale of this epidemic of violence across our capital city. Just 2 weeks ago, 14-year-old Kalyan Bakasa was murdered on the 472 bus in Woolwich. And in my own community, in December 2023, we were devastated by the senseless loss of 17-year-old Ilya Habibi, who was tragically murdered outside of Sutton Station. Ilya was a young man with his entire future ahead of him. He had aspirations, potential and opportunities that a blade cruelly stole from him that cold winter's day. My heartfelt thoughts are with his family and friends as they continue to cope with such a heartbreaking loss, particularly painful that the alleged killer remains free overseas. Knife crime in our capital has risen year on year, with over 14,588 offences recorded in 2023 alone. We have all seen tragic stories of teenagers stabbed to death on buses, in their local high streets and outside their schools. No young person in this country should have to live in fear of such violent crimes when they leave their homes. Parents should not have to worry each day about sending their children into the world, dreading the threat that they may fall victim to a senseless stabbing that would tragically cut short their burgeoning lives. This crisis was not addressed properly by the previous government, nor the current or past London Mayor, and urgently requires addressing today. It is encouraging to see the government taking new steps to clamp down on the sale of ninja and samurai swords and giving police greater powers to seize and destroy weapons. But there is so much more to do. A whole-of-society approach is desperately needed. One huge step forward that the Labour government needs to focus on is a return to proper neighbourhood policing, where officers are visible and known in their local communities. In my constituency and across London, we're increasingly seeing safer neighbourhood officers being abstracted from their areas to other forces and parts of London, leading to a significant reduction in the capacity for ongoing proactive policing in our communities. While we've seen abstraction levels drop in recent months in my constituency and across Sutton, it is still a problem. We've also seen a massive reduction in the number of police community support officers, or PCSOs. The number of PCSOs in the Metropolitan Police declined by 32% from 2015 to 2023. The data shows that in 2015 there were 1,887 PCSOs, which had dropped by 572 to only 1,215 in 2023. While this is a startling statistic, more dramatic were the cuts made under Mayor Johnson. Between 2008 and 2016, PCSO numbers dropped from 4,247 to only 1,626. Under the last Conservative Mayor, PCSO levels were cut to 38% of the level when he took office. That means less than 2 in 5 PCSOs remained after his 8 years running this capital. The failure to protect proper community policing under both Labour and Conservative administrations in London is deeply concerning, as it undermines the important role that visible policing plays in creating a sense of security and, of course, deterrence. Research consistently shows that having officers on the beat serves a powerful deterrent to violent crime, including stabbings, with criminal activity dropping significantly in areas where police are actively engaged and present. The surge in violent crime only highlights the dangers of reduced police presence in our neighbourhoods. It is extremely concerning to think that Elia's tragic murder occurred just minutes from a police station, outside a busy train station and a packed bus stop, an area where policing should have been as visible and as proactive as possible. This tragic incident, among many others, should be a wake-up call to the government to get the Metropolitan Police to take seriously the scale of the problem of repeated abstractions and underscore the importance of maintaining dedicated officers in our communities. We need to ensure that all areas are adequately staffed with officers who can prevent crime before it happens and respond quickly when needed. Only then will we see a reduction in knife crime. And on the community side, we mustn't forget that the previous Conservative government made the problem worse by savagely cutting youth services. Often these services are the front line in the war for young people's hearts and minds, standing as a buffer between a life of violence and a life of opportunity. Too often these services are derided as a waste of money or belittled as merely another community project. This is utterly misguided. Youth services should be recognised as offering a vital public service, that of early intervention, as members around the House in this debate have already made clear. And when they're well funded, these services are able to offer a vital role alongside police, schools and other third sector organisations in developing what we really need, a public health approach to knife crime. That approach, which the Liberal Democrats in London and indeed across the country have long called for, is the right one. It mirrors the approach Glasgow took and which has been shown to yield results. And let us be clear, results in this area measured in something more important than profit or efficiency, results in this area mean lives saved, lives nourished and lives reinvigorated. So a society that stands by and watches youth services wither away is not a society truly committed to delivering for young people and preventing knife crime. Let's move forward with the renewed conviction that the measure of a civilised society is how it treats its most vulnerable, which in this case absolutely must also be remembered in the context of young people. Thank you.
You can see the remaining time. I now call Opposition Spokesman, Shadow Minister Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure, privilege and an honour to serve under your chairmanship on this first occasion. I'd like to also thank the Honourable Member for West Bromwich for bringing forward this important debate today. Honourable Members have shared the horror and pain caused by knife crime and suffered by too many across this country. The rate of knife crime in the West Midlands has been and remains too high. Knife crime is a blight on the region, creating challenges that go beyond injuries and tragically fatalities. It undermines communities, leaving people feeling unsafe and in some cases deterring them from going about their daily lives. Any government is right to prioritise this issue. The commitment to reducing knife crime by 50% in the next decade is a worthy goal set by the government. However, precisely how it intends to achieve this goal remains uncertain. It will require difficult and targeted action. As many members will know, the number of offences, excluding fraud and computer misuse, dropped by 50% between 2010 and 2023. Fraud and computer misuse also dropped by 20% from 2017, when it was first recorded, to 2023. This included significant decreases in violence with and without injury. We know, therefore, that substantial reductions in crime are achievable. However, the specific challenges posed by knife crime will require tailored solutions. I would appreciate if the Minister could elaborate today in greater depth on how the government plans to achieve this ambitious reduction. People need to know that when they make the decision to carry a knife, there's a good chance they'll be caught and face the full force of the law. Police officers need to know that when they make the decision to stop and search, that the state will be on their side. You can't take knives off the street without trusting, empowering and properly resourcing our police officers. This should include utilising violence reduction units and ensuring police are deployed in the right places at the right times, using hotspot policing. The continuation of funding for serious violence in the police funding settlement is welcome. However, it appears to fall short of the £55 million per year previously allocated to the 20 violence reduction units. The last government had outlined plans to increase this by 50% to support preventative interventions. I understand that funding for these initiatives is often drawn from multiple sources. Can the Minister clarify how much funding these units will receive and whether further increases are expected in future years? There are now more police on the streets than ever before, but concerns have been raised by police forces that they may need to reduce headcounts over the next year due to funding pressures from the recently announced settlement. This issue has been exacerbated by the increase in employers' national insurance contributions, and there are projections that as many as 3,500 officers could be lost. While the government has indicated it will increase the number of neighbourhood police, can the Minister assure us today that total officer numbers will not decline over the coming years? A reduction in officers would pose significant challenges to investigating knife crime and delivering justice. There are also areas where I hope we can find agreement. The Criminal Justice Bill, which unfortunately was unable to pass prior to the general election, contained measures to strengthen knife crime legislation, including addressing the sale and use of weapons. One proposal was to increase the maximum penalty for selling knives to those under 18 from 6 months to 2 years imprisonment. Another was the introduction of a new offence for the possession of a knife or offensive weapon in public or private with the intent to use unlawful violence, carrying a maximum penalty of 4 years imprisonment. When the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council gave evidence to the Criminal Justice Bill Committee, they expressed full support for these proposals. My question to the Minister is whether the government intends to include such measures in upcoming legislation during this session of Parliament. Turning to the West Midlands specifically, knife crime is undeniably a significant issue. The Crime Survey for England and Wales, released in October, revealed that 10% of all knife crime occurred in this region. While there was a small positive development, knife or sharp instrument offences recorded by West Midlands Police saw a 1% decrease compared to a 16% increase recorded by the Metropolitan Police. Overall levels remain far too high. Indeed, the total number of offences recorded by West Midlands Police is still 2% higher than pre-pandemic levels. It's worth noting that NHS data from September 2024 also showed a small decrease in hospital admins involving sharp objects or firearms compared to the previous year, with 10 fewer incidents recorded in the West Midlands. However, we all agree we need further reductions. Both the local police force and government must strive to reduce the levels of knife crime in the region. As members from the region will recall, the Peel assessment by His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Service was critical of West Midlands Police Force. Improvements have undoubtedly been made since, but there is more to do. One positive example highlighted in the report was the force's use of a knife prediction tool developed by their data analytics lab. This tool uses 3 years of data to predict where injuries caused by knives are most likely to occur up to 4 weeks in advance. Measures are then put in place to reduce risks in these areas. Between April and August 23, compared to the same period in 2022, the force reported a 4.4% reduction in recorded cases of serious youth violence involving knives and an 11.4% overall reduction in serious youth violence. Furthermore, West Midlands Police benefited in 2022 from 20,612 additional patrols funded by the Home Office's GRIP and Hotspot policing initiatives. With continued advancements in technology, it's reasonable to expect further gains. Can the government confirm that it will ensure sustained financial support for these effective policing methods? Despite these examples of progress, the Inspectorate identified areas requiring improvement. One key recommendation was to ensure officers have the skills and capabilities needed to carry out high-quality investigations. This concern is reflected in the statistics. In the year ending March 2024, 30.1% of offenders charged or summoned for possession of weapons offences nationally were successfully prosecuted. However, in the West Midlands, this figure was just 17.4%. While this encompasses various dangerous weapons, knives remain amongst the most common. How does the government intend to work with West Midlands Police, the Crown Prosecution Service, to ensure offenders are brought to justice? Finally, I wish to raise the matter of devolved powers. As members from the region will be aware, the former Mayor for the West Midlands and the previous government sought to transfer Police and Crime Commissioner powers. Whilst this proposal was not supported by the Labour PCC, it raises questions about the government's future plans. In light of the devolution white paper, does the Minister foresee the Mayor assuming the powers of the PCC? I'm confident the Minister understands the scale of the challenge in reducing knife crime. It's by no means an easy task. Therefore, I hope we can work together in this Parliament to support measures that will take meaningful action to reduce knife crime, not only in the West Midlands, but across the country. Thank you.
I now call on the Minister of State for Policing, Fire and Crime Prevention, who I know will want to leave a little time at the end for the member in charge to wind up. Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, and it is a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, Sir John, and can I congratulate you on your impeccable chairing of Westminster Hall this afternoon. And let me begin by thanking my honourable friend, the member for West Bromwich, for securing this debate and her very powerful and eloquent speech in opening the debate. I am very grateful to her and to all the other members who have contributed this afternoon. I wanted to just refer to the Right Honourable Member for Aldridge Brownhills. I know she has a long-standing interest in this particular area, and she highlighted the important work that the James Brindley Foundation are doing. My honourable friend, the member for Edgbaston, who referred to the commitment in the Labour Party manifesto back in July of a mandatory referral to the youth offending teams for those young people caught carrying knives. Really important. My honourable friend, the honourable member, I should say, for Stratford-upon-Avon, and my honourable friend for Hales Owen, who talked about the very tragic cases in their constituency with their constituents. The honourable member for Perry Barr, who talked about his personal experience of youth provision and how important that was in his life. The honourable member for Wolverhampton West, who talked about the coalition to tackle knife crime, and I will want to say something about that in a moment. My honourable friend for Wolverhampton North East, who brought her enormous experience as a former deputy head teacher to this debate. The Honourable Member for Strangford, who talked about the horror of knife crime and the attacks particularly on women and girls, and the need to work together through all the nations to bring together the experience and what works. And my honourable friend for Worcester, who made that really compelling speech about young people and putting them at the heart of the response to knife crime. So I'm grateful to all those contributions, and I think, as has been made clear throughout the debate, knife crime is a source of harm, fear, and in the worst cases, unbearable grief. Today's debate has focused on the West Midlands, but the truth is that this is an issue that affects far too many communities across Britain. And it is those stories that we've heard so powerfully today affecting families up and down the nation. And we've seen that yet again in recent weeks, with a number of fatal stabbings of young people in different parts of the country, we can only imagine what the loved ones of those who've lost their lives will be going through. And of course, all of our thoughts and prayers are with them. Now, we know that knife crime has destroyed far too many lives. And that is why we have described this issue as a national crisis in our manifesto, and it is why, as part of the Safer Streets mission, which is central to the government's plan for change, we are aiming to halve knife crime within a decade. We've already taken some important steps forward since the general election, and I will touch on those as well as further measures that we will be taking as I respond to the points that have been raised today. So first of all, I just want to deal with this issue about resources being available to police in the West Midlands. For this coming year, the total funding to police forces overall will be up to £17.4 billion, an increase of nearly £1 billion compared to 24-25. And the West Midlands Police will receive up to £838.4 million in funding in 25-26. That's an increase of 48 million when compared to the 24-25 settlement, and that's 3% more in real terms. The neighbourhood policing has been talked a lot about today, and the idea of visible policing being so important to our communities. This government is determined that neighbourhood policing will be rebuilt and that communities in the West Midlands will benefit from our neighbourhood policing guarantee. We all know as constituency MPs the impact that good neighbourhood policing has on our local community confidence and preventing crime, and this should never be underestimated. Local officers and PCSOs who know their patch are the building block of every aspect of policing, be it tackling knife crime, serious or organised crime, or extremist and terror threats. That's why the restoration of neighbourhood policing is at the heart of our plans to reform policing, and why we've committed to delivering an additional 13,000 police officers, PCSOs, special constables in neighbourhood policing roles. I also want to refer to violence reduction units, because we know one of the big challenges in dealing with knife crime is getting to bring all the different agencies together. And that's why the violence reduction units have been an essential part of bringing partners together to understand and tackle the drivers of serious violence in their areas, and delivering a range of early interventions and prevention programmes to support young people away from a life of crime. And that includes activity in Coventry and Wolverhampton to support high-risk young people and to connect them with an exit pathway from gangs, violence and county lines. And I can confirm that all VRUs have the A&E Navigator programmes as part of the what they provide locally. Now, I want to move on to the specifics around tackling knife crime that this government has introduced. First of all, we've taken swift action to take dangerous weapons off the streets. We ran a surrender and compensation scheme for zombie-style knives and zombie-style machetes between the 26th of August 24 and the 23rd of September 24, following which the ban came into force on the 24th of September, and it is now illegal to sell or own these weapons. Secondly, we ran a consultation between the 13th of November 24 and the 11th of December 24, seeking views on the legal description of a ninja sword to help our plans for an effective ban. Thirdly, we have commenced a review into the online sales and delivery of knives led by Commander Stephen Clayman, the National Policing Lead for Knife Crime. This will identify gaps in the current processes and legislation and the most effective ways to address this. This review will report to the Home Secretary at the end of January, and I hear very much the need for rapid action when that review has been produced. Fourthly, we've consulted on introducing personal liability measures on senior executives of online platforms or marketplaces who fail to take action to remove illegal content relating to knives and other weapons. The consultation was launched on the 13th of November and closed on the 11th of December, and we're currently analysing the responses. Next, I want to pay tribute to the Coalition to Tackle Knife Crime. We are clear that our ambition to halve knife crime will not succeed in isolation, and that means working together with those who share our vision for safer communities. This is why the Prime Minister launched the Coalition to Tackle Knife Crime in September, bringing together campaign groups, families of those who've tragically lost their lives to knife crime, young people who've been impacted, and community leaders united in their mission to save lives. We are delighted to have representation from the West Midlands, with Pooja Kanda, Lynn Baird and Mark Brindley, all members of the Coalition. And I want to pay tribute to all those families who have campaigned so hard in this space for far too long. Having the lived experience of young people is critical to the Coalition, and we are keen to ensure that they have a platform to share their views, ideas and solutions to make Britain a safer place for the next generation. And that leads me on to this next issue, which is far too many children and young people today are facing poorer life outcomes, including becoming involved in knife crime, because they are not effectively identified and supported early enough. To address this issue head-on, we have committed to the creation of the Young Futures programme, which will establish a network of Young Futures hubs and Young Futures prevention partnerships to intervene early to ensure this cohort is identified and offered support, as well as creating more opportunities for young people in their communities through the provision of an open access to mental health, for example, or mentoring and career support. Young Futures Hubs will bring together the support services that tackle the underlying needs of vulnerable children and young people, making them more accessible to those who need them. As for Young Futures prevention partnerships, they will bring together key partners in local areas across England and Wales to identify vulnerable children and young people at risk of being drawn into crime, map local youth service provision and offer support in a more systematic way to divert them. I want to just say a few words about knife-enabled robbery. This is another one of my top priorities. It's incredibly distressing and dangerous for victims. Levels of knife-enabled robbery are unacceptably high and have risen by 11% nationally in the last year. And that's why I chair a new knife-enabled robbery task force, bringing together chief constables and other criminal justice partners to take urgent action to tackle it. Working with the College of Policing, the task force has used the latest data and evidence to establish what works when tackling this crime type. And I've asked task force chiefs to now consider how they will implement these insights into their plans. And through the task force, I've heard directly from West Midlands Police about what action they're taking locally to combat knife-enabled robbery. Under the leadership of Chief Constable Craig Guilford, the force has bolstered prevention-focused activities in their hotspots, made improvements to the way priority offenders are identified and managed, and taken steps to ensure and enhance the quality of investigations. Recent results are very promising, with considerable reductions in offence levels and increasing numbers of suspects brought to justice. I also want to refer to serious violence reduction orders in relation to stop and search. West Midlands Police are one of the 4 forces piloting serious violence reduction orders. The 2-year pilot, launched in April 23, is due to finish in April this year. And these court orders can be placed on adults upon conviction of a knife or offensive weapons offence. They provide the police with the power to automatically stop and search individuals convicted of knife offences, with the aim to deter habitual knife-carrying behaviour. Now, stop and search is an important tool, but it must be used in a fair and effective way. And in the 12 months to March 24, stop and search led to 1,293 offensive weapons and firearms being found by police through stop and search in the West Midlands. However, we know that this tactic often disproportionately affects ethnic minority communities, so it needs to be deployed in a targeted way and with sensitivity. And so while the government welcomes reductions in the ethnic disparity of disproportionality of stop and search in recent years, there is more work to do. And in the West Midlands, black people are still 2.7 times more likely to be stopped and searched than white people. The other issue that we need to talk about, and that has been raised by several honourable members, is county lines. To achieve our goal of halving knife crime in a decade, it is essential that we tackle the drugs gangs which drive violence and exploit children into criminality. That is why our manifesto included a commitment to introduce a new offence of child criminal exploitation. And county lines is the most violent model of drug supply and a harmful form of child criminal exploitation. The West Midlands is one of 4 urban regions in which we are funding a dedicated task force to close lines, prosecute violent offenders and safeguard vulnerable people. Last month, we saw West Midlands Police take part in the National Week of Intensification, targeting county lines gangs. They achieved excellent results in making over 80 arrests, safeguarding more than 90 children and 20 vulnerable adults, and taking dozens of dangerous bladed weapons off our streets. In conclusion, I just want to finish by repeating my earlier thanks to my honourable friend and for all who have participated in this debate. I think whatever side of the House that we sit on and whatever constituency we represent, this is an issue that matters deeply to us and to the people that we represent, and we all have a responsibility to do everything in our power to tackle this scourge of knife crime.
Thank you. Sarah, could you finish a little before 4 so that I can put the motion? Thank you, Sarah.
Yes, it's been a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir John, and I really appreciate all the very moving contributions from everyone in the room. The member for Aldridge Brown Hills, who talked about the James Brindley Foundation and the Knife Angel, which we also had in Sandwell. The member for Birmingham Edgbaston, who talked about this as a public health crisis, which it absolutely is. The member for Stratford-upon-Avon, who talked about Cody's Law that she has been campaigning for. The member for Hales Owen, who talked about the terrible case of Ryan, also killed in a nightclub, which is very moving. We heard from the member for Perry Barr, who talked about the importance of youth clubs and your experience growing up in Aston. The member for Wolverhampton West, who talked about us being the knife crime capital of England, which is something that we need to change. The member for Wolverhampton North East, who talked about her experience in school and the fact that the impact it can have when you do have horrendous incidents nearby, such as Ronan and Sean. The member for Strangford, who talked powerfully about the impact on women and girls of knives using in sexual violence as well, and the case of Natalie, which is extremely tragic. The member for Worcester, who talks about the importance to young people in his area of tackling violence. I appreciate everything the Lib Dem spokesperson said as well. And obviously the opposition spokesperson talked about them welcoming the 50% commitment to reduce knife crime, which is good, although obviously our view on the figures about police in this country do differ. And I really appreciate the Minister talking about the fact that one of the top missions of this government is to make our streets safer, and that's about putting more resources into policing. It's also about how we get those knives off our streets. So I'm really glad that we are reviewing every bit of the current legislation, looking at the gaps on those online retailers and how people are still getting these knives. And also personal liability is absolutely essential for the people who are selling these. And I'm really glad about the work of Idris Elba and others around that coalition about knife crime. And it was great that the Prime Minister welcomed that coalition to the Cabinet table in September to tackle this. If we fulfil our commitment to halving knife crime in a decade, the rewards won't just be lives saved. It'll be higher levels of trust within our communities, streets that feel safer, town centres more successful. And prevention of knife crime is not easy. There are no quick fixes for this, but it is our duty to try.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered the prevention of knife crime in the West Midlands. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Thank you. Thanks, Wendy. Bye, Mark.